in this part of chemistry, we are going to understand what is oxidation process and what is reduction process. And we can understand also what is reducing agent and oxidizing agent. And the last point of the topic of today, we're going to understand how can we find the oxidation number of an element in a compound. Okay, here, for example, if we are talking about the left of the periodic table here, as you know, that these elements are metals. So lithium is a metal, sodium is a metal, right? Potassium, magnesium, these ones metals. And here, these elements that are on the right of the periodic table, they are usually what? Non-metals. So now, when there is a reaction that happens, for example, between sodium, which is Na, plus chlorine, this element is on the left of the periodic table, and this element is from the right side of the periodic table. They're gonna give us what? NaCl. Good. So that means, what happens now? What happens now for the sodium and for the chlorine? The sodium itself, it lost one electron to the chlorine. So that means the Na, it will lose one electron, and this electron will go to the what? To the chlorine. So when Na loses one electron, in this case, its protons will be greater than its electrons. So that means the positive charge, which is protons, will be greater than the negative charge of electrons. So this increase number of protons will be more than electrons by one, because there's losing one what in the electrons number. So that means here will be positive one, and the chlorine will accept one electron. So that means the charge of electrons will be more by one. So that means it's gonna be what? Negative. That means here negative. That means there is one negative electron more than the number of protons. Okay, so this one now, in this process or in this reaction now, what happened to the sodium is what is reduced, is decreasing in number of what? Of electrons. So that means it is losing electrons. So what happens for the sodium is what? Is losing of what? Of electrons. And what happens to the chlorine here is gaining of electrons. Gaining of what? Of electrons. So look here now, the process of losing electrons, we call it what? We call it oxidation. So the process of losing electrons, we call it what? Oxidation. So now what is oxidation? It is the process of what? Of losing electrons. Okay, now what is the process that happened for chlorine now? Is reduction. So what is reduction now? Reduction is the process of gaining electrons. So what happened to the sodium is losing electrons. So this process we call it oxidation, and for chlorine it is gaining electrons, and we call it what? Reduction. This is number one. Now, so we understand what is oxidation, what is reduction. Oxidation is the process of losing electrons, and that one is of gaining electrons. And what do we need to know more is that the process of oxidation, it happens for the elements on the left or on the right of the periodic table. Where is the sodium? Sodium is on the left of the periodic table. So oxidation, it happens for the elements that are on the left of the periodic table. And in general, these ones are metals. So it happens for what? For metals. And reduction, it happens for the elements on the right of the periodic table. And usually these ones are non-metals. Good. So we understand now what is reduction and what is what? Oxidation. Good. And we said oxidation is in the left of the periodic table, it happens, and the one on the periodic table, and the right of the periodic table. Okay, now we can understand now what is oxidizing agent, and what is what? Reducing agent. What is reducing what? Agent. And what's the difference between them? Look, reducing agent is the element that causes the reduction process. Reducing agent is the element that causes the reduction process. And reducing oxidizing agent is the agent that causes the oxidation what? Process. Good. So here now, what happened if we go back now to what we said? What happened for sodium here? What happened to the sodium is oxidation. Okay, what was the element that was behind this process of oxidation that happened for the sodium? What element that was behind it was what? Was chlorine. So chlorine was the responsible element for the oxidation process that happened for the sodium. So this one now that is behind the oxidation process, we call it oxidizing agent. So oxidizing agent is chlorine here because it is the element that is behind the oxidation what? Process. Okay, what is reducing agent? Okay, what is reducing agent? Reducing agent is the element that is behind, that is responsible for the reduction process. Okay, where was the reduction process? The reduction process was for chlorine. So that means what was behind it, or what is the element that was behind it, is sodium. So sodium now is the element that was behind the reduction process. That means it was responsible for it. And this reduction, it happened for chlorine. What was responsible for it is the sodium. So sodium is reducing agent. So now, as you see, reducing agents like sodium are on the left of the periodic table. So on the left of the periodic table, there are reducing agents and also as agents, and in processes, there is what? Oxidation. There is what? Oxidation process on the left of the periodic table. And on the right of the periodic table, what happens there is there are oxidizing agents on the right of the periodic table, and what happens there is reduction process. So we understand now four things. We understand what is oxidation process, and we understand what is reduction process, and we understand what is oxidizing agent, and we understand what is what? Reducing what? Agent. As a summary, that oxidation process is the process of losing electrons, and it happens on the left of the periodic, for elements on the left of the periodic table. And reduction process is the process of gaining electrons, and it happens to the elements on the right of the periodic table. And oxidizing agent is the agent that is responsible for the oxidation. And usually oxidizing agents are the non-elements on the right of the periodic table. And reducing agents are the elements that are responsible for the reduction processes. And they are the elements on the left of the periodic table. So that means usually metals here on the left of the periodic tables are reducing agents. Reducing what? Agents. So I hope these ones now, the four ideas are clear. Okay, now, if I tell you something now, if I'm talking about sodium now, in the reaction Na plus Cl, it gives you what? NaCl. NaCl. Okay, in this process now, sodium loses electrons. So what do we call sodium? We call it now reducing agent. So that means reducing agents in reactions, they lose electrons. And what is the process that happened to them? What happened to them is what? As a process, oxidation. Okay, related to chlorine here, what it gains electrons. So that means it is oxidizing agent, and the process that happened to it is reduction. Okay. Now, can I say that sodium is oxidized or sodium is reduced? What can I say that? So what is the process for sodium? It is oxidation. So I say sodium is oxidized. Okay, what is the process that happened to chlorine? It is reduction. So I say chlorine is reduced. Okay, now if I go now to the sodium, if I'm talking about element sodium, in the reaction, it will lose one electron. It will lose what? One electron. So when it loses one electron, its oxidation number, which is the power, will be positive 1. Good. So that means it will lose one electron. Good. What about chlorine now? chlorine, it will gain one electron. It will gain one electron in order to be Cl what? Negative. So look here now and pay attention to that. This process, we call it what? Oxidation process. Oxidation process. And in the oxidation process, you're going to see the electrons are on the right side. So that means it is losing electrons, and losing of electrons will be on the right side of the equation. While this process, we call it what? A reduction. And the electrons, you're going to find them on the left of the periodic table, on the left of the equation. On the left of the equation, you're going to find this one is what? Is reduction, and it is gaining electrons. So gaining electrons will be usually on the left of the equation, of the chemical equation, while losing electrons, you're going to find it what? On the right side of the equation. So if they tell you now just what is this process, is it oxidation or reduction, you understand now since it is in the right, so that means this is what? Oxidation, and it is what? Reducing agents. So this one now is oxidation process, and this element is what? Is reducing agent, and this process is reduction, and this chlorine is what? Is oxidizing agent. I hope that is clear now. For any reaction, you need to see what happens. Okay, how to link that? Just link it in your mind now. What was the power here? What was the power of chlorine? It was 1, right? It was what? 1, or there means there is nothing there. Then it was here, it was reduced. That means from 0 to -1, or that means less. So that means in reduction, the powers becomes less, while in oxidation, the power will what? Will increase. So that means you can deal with this one. 0 oxidation number here 0, and oxidation number here 0. Then this 0 becomes -1, and this 0 becomes what? +1. So this one increases. So that means in oxidation process, the oxidation number increases, while in reduction, as you see, the oxidation process what? The oxidation number what? Decreases. It was 0 here, then it becomes -1. Here it's -1, so that means it decreases. That's link it just as reduction, because the oxidation number will decrease. Okay, now if I have compounds, how I know their oxidation number? Okay, if I give you here just sodium as element, any element, sodium, chlorine, and I tell you what is its oxidation number, always you say it is what? 0 in their what? Natural, in their what? Ground state here. So that means it is elements in their nature as elements, their oxidation number is what? 0. Their oxidation number is 0. And also compounds, if I tell you now H2O, what is the oxidation number of this compound H2O? As long as there is no power up, so that means also you're going to say what? It's 0. So here is 0, here is 0. Okay, but now if I tell you now, I give you H2O, and I tell you now what is the oxidation number for oxygen alone. For oxygen alone here, as you see, oxygen usually it gains 2 electrons, so that means its oxidation will be what? -2. And here now hydrogen is usually +1. Now if you add +1 times 2, it's gonna be +2. And if you add +2 plus -2, it's gonna be what? 0. Because it's the total what? The total power of the what? Of the compound. And you'll have many examples to apply, to practice this idea. So that means oxidation here of oxygen is -2, and hydrogen +1. If you multiply it by 2, and then you add the powers of oxidation number for the whole compound, you're going to find it what? 0. You're going to find it 0. Okay. If I tell you I have HNO3, and I tell you now what is the oxidation number for nitrogen. What is the oxidation number of what? Of nitrogen. How can you do it now? You know that, and you need to remember that oxygen in general, its oxidation number is -2, and hydrogen is +1. Get in general, there is only one exception here related to what we study for oxygen, which is peroxide, which is H2O2. In this exception, oxygen will be -1 only. But otherwise, oxygen always will be what? -2. Hydrogen will be always what? +1, except when it is just with metals like H and A. And in this case, it's going to be what? Negative. Or NaH, it's going to be what? Negative. But in this, usually it's going to be +1. So this one is +1 in compounds, and this one is what? -2, and you need to memorize it. Now, if I want to find the oxidation number of nitrogen, the sum has to be 0. So hydrogen, I have +1. Good. And oxygen, now I have -2. -2 times how many oxygen I have here? 3. -2 times 3 is going to be what? -6. And nitrogen is here. Now the result, which is the whole overall oxidation number of the whole compound, has to be what? 0. In this case, 0, because no power is there. So now when I add +2 and -6, and this number for nitrogen, I need to add 0. So +1 and -6 will be -5. So -5, I have to add it with +5 in order to get what? 0. So you can say what nitrogen here is +5. So this is just example, and you have many examples to find oxidation number. So the idea is just to understand what is oxidation, reduction, reducing agent, oxidizing agent, and how to find the oxidation number of an element or of an element in a compound. Thank you. See you in other videos.